So we're back for the fifth and final talk about the Earth's biotic enterprise. In other words, about biodiversity. And today I want to talk about the proposition that human beings are causing the sixth mass extinction since multicellular life began. In addition, I want to talk about the value of species and biodiversity on Earth. So let's get started. In the last talk, we discussed the big five mass extinctions, and what we learned about them was that in a mass extinction, life itself didn't go extinct, but the composition of life changed, and it took millions of years for the biodiversity to recover from the extinction. In looking at the proposition that humans are causing the sixth mass extinction, what is some of the evidence? Well, the rate of endangerment of species has never been higher, and there are several conservation groups that classifying species as to their state of endangerment. A third of all reef-building corals, freshwater mollusks, sharks, and rays are threatened or endangered. A quarter of all mammals are threatened or endangered. A fifth of all reptiles are threatened or endangered. A sixth of all birds, the same. So the next thing we want to know is, okay, it's one thing to be endangered, but are extinction rates actually higher? In order to determine whether today's extinction rates are elevated, we need to determine the background extinction rate. In other words, the extinction rate in the past before humans had an effect. As a first guess, you might say, well, it must have been the same as the rate at which new species form, about 1 per 2 million years. That is a good guess, but as we've already seen, during times of stability, the number of species slowly increases, so extinction rates must be lower than the rate of speciation on average, except during these events when extinction rates increase. Until recently, the accepted estimate was about 1 extinction per million species year. And a species year is if there are 1,000 species in a group, then every year that group has 1,000 species years. More recent calculations, however, have reduced the background extinction rate to about 1/10 of an extinction per million species years. An extinction rate of 0.1 extinctions per million species years means that if there are 1 million species in a group, we would expect 1/10 of a species to go extinct each year, or 1 species to go extinct every 10 years. We can determine the background extinction rate by examining the fossil record, and as you might expect, the background extinction rate differs among different taxonomic groups. Recent research shows that for mammals, for example, it's about 1/4 of an extinction per million species year. And there are about 5,500 species of mammals on Earth. So how much time should pass for each extinction? Well, if you do the math, we should see 1 extinction every 727 years. The actual current extinction rate has been estimated to be about 100 extinctions per million species year. So in other words, it's about 400 times higher than background rate. Extinction rates in other groups of vertebrates show similar increases compared to background. The number of vertebrate animals that have gone extinct in the last 100 years would have required 800 to 10,000 years to occur, given the background extinction rates. You might be wondering, so what are the primary causes of human-induced extinction? I'm going to outline 5, and perhaps you can think of others. The first is unsustainable land use, such as habitat destruction. For example, the Kirtland's warbler in Michigan had its habitat eliminated by fire control, and when that was realized, humans started to burn parts of upper Michigan where the Kirtland's warbler inhabited. Not many people live, and lo and behold, the Kirtland's warbler has come back and it has been taken off the endangered species list. When I got to Michigan as a grad student, there were about 200 pairs, and now there are about 2,000 pairs. Habitat fragmentation. Instead of having large blocks of habitat, you have many smaller blocks, and this increases the edge. 70% of the world's remaining forest is within 1 kilometer of an edge, And this has been estimated to cause a 13 to 75% reduction in biodiversity in those fragments. The second reason is overexploitation. Several species have been wiped out before industrialization by overexploitation, and several species have been wiped out for commercial reasons, the passenger pigeon, the Eskimo curlew, and those were done as food sources being shipped from the Great Plains to the East Coast in the 1800s. And several species of egrets were nearly driven to extinction. Why? Because it was the fashion to have egret plumes in hats. Beavers were nearly driven to extinction. They've made a remarkable recovery. Why? Fur for hats. Hat seems to be a leading cause of extinction. Fisheries have overfished fish and made them, certainly, if they haven't driven them to extinction, they've driven them into extreme rarity. The rhinoceros has been hunted to extinction in several cases and near extinction for all species. Elephants are on the verge of extirpation in most countries in which they occur. Several seals and sea lions have been exploited. Several whales have been exploited. Third, invasive species. We've reviewed some of the evidence, but islands have been particularly affected by native species. We can think of Guam, where the brown tree snake was inadvertently brought in by human beings, and it has wiped out virtually every single bird on the island of Guam, many of which were endemic. And diseases, when they are transported by human beings to new places, have been particularly bad. Elms and chestnut trees in the United States are on the verge of extinction because of diseases brought from the old world to the new world. Pollution. Peregrine falcon, brown pelican, their populations were driven almost to extinction by DDT. The ban on DDT has saved them both, and they've both been taken off the endangered species list. The current drastic reduction in bee populations over the last 10 to 15 years appears to be due to low levels of pesticides. The monarch populations have been reduced to an all-time low due to the use of an herbicide that has killed its host plant, and plastic ingestion by seabirds is driving more and more of these rare seabirds towards the brink of extinction. And finally, climate change. Habitats are moving towards the poles, in many cases faster than the species can move. Habitats are disappearing. Polar ice is disappearing, and it's thought that this will endanger polar bears. Mountaintops are getting too warm and habitat are being lost. The spruce at the tops of mountains in Arizona are gone, and those species that depend on those ecosystems are going to be gone soon too. Ocean acidification, as the pH of ocean is dropping, as the ocean is becoming more acidic, we will reach a point where animals that make mineral shells and shelters will no longer be able to do so. So those are the 5 major causes of human-induced increase in extinction rate. So we have strong evidence that the current extinction rates are elevated, and we have strong evidence that human activity is causing these. And so several sciences have proposed that we are now entering a 6th mass extinction, and it remains to be seen whether human beings can reverse that trend. We've already seen in our in-class exercise that extinction rates are elevated many hundreds of times background rate in many cases. In addition, many geologists have come forward and proposed that the Earth has entered a new epoch on the geologic timescale, and it's called the Anthropocene, the epoch of humans. Epochs are defined by changes in the geological record, and so what these scientists are proposing is that human activity will leave a permanent mark in the geological record, so that if somebody were to visit Earth in 10 million years and they were to look at the geological record, they would see a change in the sediments that are being laid down right now. So the rocks of the future would reflect the activity of human beings. So what's the evidence for that? Well, the first one is that species groups that are in the fossil record will cease to be there as they go extinct in a mass extinction. So loss of fossils from the fossil record is often used as a boundary point in the geologic timescale, as we've already mentioned. In addition, the geological strata, those layers that are being right now, will show telltale signs of human activity. There will be radioactive isotopes in those rocks that have never been seen before in the history of Earth. They're the synthetic radioisotopes. Plastics and organic material of a different kind will be in those rocks. As it metamorphoses, some of that may be utterly destroyed, but some of it may stay in perpetuity. And the waste products of fossil fuels are going to be deposited in sediments, and those will leave a telltale mark. The extinction of species has created a call for species conservation. And we have seen in the last 50 years several really impressive laws, such as the Endangered Species Act in the United States or the CITES Treaty through the UN. And you should at some point look at both of these laws, especially if you're taking the AP exam. Despite these laws, we recently learned that 60% of the reduction in animal life on the planet has occurred in the 50 years since 1970. In other words, there is no sign that the pace of human destruction of biodiversity is decreasing. In fact, if anything, it's accelerating. So how do we conserve a species whose population has been decreasing by human activity? This is a subject that I cannot do justice to in this course. You could spend years studying it, and it would be a great thing to spend your college years thinking about and studying. There are no simple answers. One good sign is that we've moved on from saving particular species to a habitat preservation approach. The idea being if the ecosystem is intact, then the species will do well. As we have seen with other environmental issues, I really feel we need a radical shift in how humans interact with the planet and its life. If environmental issues show me anything, it's that humans have to seriously think about how to become sustainable and then take serious steps to arrive at that goal. I know that humans can do it. It's just a matter of overcoming a lot of political obstacles. Finally, I want to talk about why save species. The argument for saving species, to my mind, boils down to two arguments. The first is species are useful and or necessary for the human economy and for human survival as a species. So there's a utilitarian economic aspect to species. And the second is species have their own intrinsic value and their own right to exist. We're going to look at both of these arguments. I'm going to try to provide a short list of the utility of species. They provide numerous ecosystem services, and these have a huge economic value. And there are all sorts of papers that have tried to evaluate these and made estimates of what the economic value is for the ecosystem services provided by species. And you can look those up if you're interested. A huge number of species, in addition, are directly consumed by humans. So they create a tremendous amount of the economy. More than 40,000 species are directly consumed by humans. So as biodiversity gets whittled away, that number will get whittled away. There's the future value argument. Crops have a lifespan, and they will develop problems, and we will need biodiversity to ensure new genes for our crops or new crops can be developed from native species. Pharmaceuticals. Most pharmaceuticals are derivatives of natural products. One recent study showed that of 1,000 drugs developed over the 20 years before the study, not one of them was designed completely synthetically. They were all developed based on typically plant analogs, or they were derivatives and extracts from plants. And finally, the value of genetic diversity and the genes that exist in the world is of incredible value in the future for us, especially as we learn how to manipulate the genome with greater and greater prowess. As one journalist recently said, we need to understand that our lives depend on species most of us have never heard of. There's also the fear of future consequences. Humans have a track record of underestimating the value of species until after they are removed. And to me, this is cause for significant alarm. In addition, We know incredibly little about most of the species. As we've already said, only about 2 million species have been described, and we think there are at least another 8 million species to be described, and maybe as many as another 28 million species to be described. So we are just incredibly ignorant, and we don't know what we're doing when we remove species. Aldo Leopold, who I would refer to as the great granddaddy of the American environmental movement, said, "To keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering." In other words, we don't want to be throwing out things that we don't know what their ecological utility is. And finally, there's the aesthetic and social value of species. Humans need to be outdoors. Humans thrive being outdoors. There's a whole school of thought that says humans need the outdoors and wilderness to be fully human. And in addition, the pursuit of aesthetic and social use of nature by humans generates a huge amount of economic value, as our summer vacations often attest to. In the article I had you read by Carl Safina, he argued that there is no one species that humans specifically need or that humans would miss if it went extinct. Although he points out it is clear that humanity ultimately depends on biodiversity for its survival in the long run. And therefore he argues that humans will never respond to the argument that, oh, we need these species, because as one species is lost, we never see that we needed it. Cumulatively, several hundred years down the road or several decades down the road, we might realize that. But we're not going to realize that in order to make decisions in the here and now. So he argues that although we don't need specific species, those species need us to survive at this point. Humans must save species that they have adversely affected, because that shows who humans are ethically. And he believes this is a powerful argument. By saving species and requiring such protection through legal means, we as human beings demonstrate that we are a part of the natural world, not different from it, and that we have a moral obligation to protect and maintain it. And I'll let you guys figure out how you respond to that. I want to look at a statement by Aldo Leopold, who talked about Darwin's true meaning and what the theory of evolution has really meant to human beings. And I think this is a profound statement, because I think this explains why there's still a huge number of people who are fighting against the idea of evolution. I'm going to read to you now from Aldo Leopold's Asan County Almanac. It is a century now since Darwin gave us the first glimpse of the origin of the species. We know now what was unknown to all the preceding caravan of generations, that men are only fellow voyagers with other creatures in the odyssey of evolution. This new knowledge should have given us, by this time, a sense of kinship with fellow creatures, a wish to live and let live, a sense of wonder over the magnitude and duration of the biotic enterprise. Above all, we should, in the century since Darwin, have come to know that man, while captain of the adventuring ship, is hardly the sole object of its quest, and that his prior assumptions to this effect arose from the simple necessity of whistling in the dark. These things, I say, should have come to us. I fear they have not come to many. For one species to mourn the death of another is a new thing under the sun. The Cro-Magnon who slew the last mammoth thought only of steaks. The sportsman who shot the last passenger pigeon thought only of his prowess. The sailor who clubbed the last great auk thought of nothing at all. But we who have lost our pigeons mourn the loss. Had the funeral been ours, the pigeons would hardly have mourned us. In this fact, rather than in Mr. DuPont's nylons or Mr. Vannevar's Bush's bombs, lies objective evidence of our superiority over the beasts. Humans are just one of 2 to 30 million species on Earth. If we are just one small part of evolution's legacy that hasn't been placed on Earth by a special being to serve some ultimate divine purpose, nor has been endowed with any special supernatural powers, then I think it is incumbent upon us that we must live by the species golden rule. And here is what I call the species golden rule. Do unto other species as you would have them do unto you. And what I mean by that is, would we as humans accept our fate if we were treated in the way that humans have exerted dominion over the species of Earth? I think not. I think our popular movies like Planet of the Apes show that humans would not accept such a fate. And if that's true, then we cannot continue to do what we're doing to other species. If the answer is no, aren't we morally obliged to find ways to live on Earth that allows other species to exist and flourish? Isn't it necessary for us to become true stewards of the Earth? So that's it for today. Until next time, think hard.